Hello, Jace. Thank you so much for joining me today. I,
Well, thanks for having me.
I really appreciate your time. So I'll start off and I'll introduce you. So you are Jace Tunnell. You are the Director of Community Engagement at the Hart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies at Texas A&M University at Corpus Christi. And some of your other hats that you wear is you're a marine biologist. You started Nurdle Patrol. And something I also recently found that I quite enjoyed is that you have a series of videos on beachcombing where you document the various things that wash upon the shores of the Gulf of Mexico. That is a
Right? Yeah, we try to educate people about the interesting things that the Gulf of Mexico offers and throws back up on our beaches. So yeah, a lot of videos on that.
it's fascinating. It's really a very interesting show. I really appreciate it. So my name is Kelly Leviker, and I am the Beyond Plastics Advocate with PIRG, the Public Interest Research Group. And we wanted to host this Nurdle FAQ just as like a basic starting point for people interested in this form of plastic pollution. So can you start us off by telling us what is a Nurdle? How did you get involved with it? And what is Nurdle Patrol?
Sure. Yeah, and thanks for having me on here. I always like talking about nurdles. Yeah, so nurdles are raw material to almost everything plastic. They're the size of a lentil. And so if you think about a lentil, I mean, little bitty things. And they're shipped all around the world to make plastic products. And so you and I never have anything to do with these nurdles. It's not something that just a normal everyday person would handle. This is all made at an industrial facility that produces these plastics, and then they're shipped through rail, through truck. Sometimes they bag them up and put them in containers to then go to a facility that puts them into a machine that melts them down, adds color, different additives, and makes an actual product that then we use. So we consider these a primary plastic, whereas like water bottles, plastic bags, anything other plastic that's already a product, we consider secondary plastic. So this primary plastic we never touch on. Now, how I kind of got involved in this was back in 2018, there was a Nurdle spill in Corpus Christi, Texas. And we were trying to get the state agency to come out, look at it, and maybe clean it up. And it became apparent that nobody was going to do anything about it because there was nobody to, they didn't know who spilled it, so there's nobody to pay for it. And then they didn't have the manpower to go out and monitor it. So we wanted to start up a citizen science project, which we ended up calling Nurdle Patrol. It was going to be 4 or 5 of us going out monthly and collecting for a 10-minute period and seeing how many we could collect. And then we started up a Facebook page called Nurdle Patrol that we would tell each other what we found. And so, I would say, okay, I'm in Corpus Christi and there's a beach here called Whitecap. Yeah, I was at Whitecap Beach. I found, 20 nurdles in a 10-minute period. So I put that together in a map, and then everyone else would kind of show the same thing. Well, that Facebook group, after about 2 weeks, we had about 300 people that were like, not even from just the Corpus area, but it was in every state in the United States in the Gulf of Mexico, and including universities and nonprofits in Mexico. They said, we want to know if these things are going to show up on our beach. And so it quickly grew up to a point to where I couldn't handle the number of emails that were coming in on a monthly basis. It was like over 500 emails additional beyond the work I was already doing. And so we created this website called nurdlepatrol.org. And it basically automated everything to where volunteers could go out, they could do their survey anywhere in the world. And then there's a reporting form that they put in there. And then their information, it shows up on a dot on a map that's color coded based on the concentration of nurdles they found. And so it makes it real easy for people to say, oh, is anybody looking in my area? Or I wonder if anybody's looked at that place I like to vacation. And if not, then they're able to say, oh, I'm going to do one when I'm there. But so that's kind of how I got involved. That's how Nurdle Patrol started. And that's what a nurdle is.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that. So can you tell us a bit more? Why is it a problem, besides being unsightly, for a nurdle to be in the environment?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest problem with these nurdles being in the environment has to do with wildlife. So animals eating them. And, in reality, if a sea turtle or bird or fish, and those are really the primary animals that would eat these things, if they eat one or two, they likely just pass through their system. But if they eat enough of them, it can entangle their intestines. It can make them feel like they're full, and then they can't eat anything natural, and they can starve to death. So that's the real impact. The secondary part of that is these plastic pellets, the nurdles, they act like sponges in the environment in terms of harmful chemicals being absorbed to the outside of them. And so if there is an area, say like Galveston Bay, which is next to Houston, that bay, there's parts of that bay that are closed to eating certain species of fish because they have high PCB levels. That's the chemicals that used to be in our light fixtures and stuff. Well, they're out in the environment basically forever. And this place in Galveston, we have tested the nurdles there, and the nurdles have really high concentrations of PCB levels. And so you can imagine this is not something you want on your skin. If you're an animal, you definitely don't want it inside of your body. And what we worry about for humans is, are there fish that are eating these nurdles thinking that they're fish eggs or seeds or something like that? And do those chemicals come off of the nurdle through the stomach lining and then into the muscle tissue that then we're eating? So there's some questions and some future research for people there to look into.
Oh, yeah, it's heartbreaking, really. How do the nurdles get into our waterways?
So nurdles get into the waterways through the entire supply chain of how they're produced, how they're transported, the place that their final destination of where they're taken off of their transportation to be able to put into a machine that melts them down and makes new ones, or even in areas that are just distributing them. So there are companies that take the nurdles and they take them off of, say, the rail car or truck, and they bag them up and they put them on pallets and then they ship them all around the world. So at every single one of those places, from manufacturing to transportation to factories that are melting them down, if they get out on the ground, which they do at every single point that I just talked about, if it rains, then they get into the nearest stormwater, then the creek, then the river, then the bay, then the ocean, and wash back up on the beach. So we are finding these not only at the beach, but along river banks and along lake shorelines. So they're basically found everywhere, and they're getting into the environment from every place that they're handled. And part of the problem is because they are so small. So if I had a handful of them and the wind is blowing 20 miles an hour, which is typical down here in Corpus Christi where I'm at, if I held those in my hand, they would just blow out. That's how lightweight they are. So they're hard to contain. Now, they're not considered hazardous material, so there really is no incentive for the folks that are handling these to treat them as such, because if they were considered hazardous material, they would be shipped differently. They would be logged differently in their books. If they were disposed of, they would be logged and they'd have to be sent to a special place. And so there's a lot of different things that would change if they were hazardous materials, but they're not. They're basically considered aggregate or rock. So lots of companies treat them that way.
Ugh. Well, they're a little bit different than aggregate and rock, eh?
Right. Yeah, especially when animals are eating them. That's the bad thing.
Yeah. So you just touched on one of the questions that I wanted to ask. Why do nurdles need to be so small?
Yeah, so they've been mass producing nurdles for, I guess, probably around 70 years, somewhere there. And all the machinery that has been made up to this point is made based on this little plastic pellet. And that's so you can imagine all the different sizes of plastic products that are made. And so some are small, some are big. But whenever they melt these little pellets down, the melting point, it all has to melt this at the same way. And so if you had a big, say, block or brick, if they shipped them that way, it would melt on the outside at first, and then it'd still be hard in the middle. And so, how do you make a product whenever your raw material is not melting at the same time? So that little pellet is very important, the size of it, in making products in a uniform way.
Okay. So what type of facility produces a Nurdle?
A factory that makes Nurdles, like a manufacturer, they're part of the petroleum industry. And so I always tell people, plastics are, the chemicals that are made to make plastic, it's a byproduct from refining oil and gas. And so it's the same industry. The petroleum industry is the manufacturers that make plastic.
All the joys of the world. So over your years of research, both through like your own personal research as well as through Nurdle Patrol, are you noticing that Nurdles in the environment as Nurdle pollution, their numbers are increasing, decreasing, seem about stable?
So we've been doing this now, I guess we're going on, we're going on 6 years now. And when you're dealing with a product like plastic that will be around for hundreds of years, we are not seeing a reduction in plastic pellets. And so we're just seeing an accumulation, but we're not seeing it go up or down. Something that lasts hundreds of years in the environment, we could stop discharging Nurdles now, and because of the amount of Nurdles that have been released into the environment already, we likely would not see a reduction over a long period of time, except for, and I'll say this because we look for two different things with Nurdle Patrol. When you go out and do a survey, you can look at the what we call the new strand line or the old strand line. So over time, you would expect to see less Nurdles at the new strand line. And the new strand line is where the water has been coming up in the last 24 hours. And so that could be for a river or lake or at the beach. And so that's the area we look for. And so if you have a flood in a river, that water line is going to push up on the riverbank. And so that would now, once the water recedes, that old line up there would be the old strand line. Now we would expect to find Nurdles there probably forever, unless they're cleaned up properly in a certain area. But the new strand line, so that would be new events basically happening, we would expect that to go down if we were able to stop the plastics industry from discharging plastic pellets into the environment. But as of now, we are not seeing that. We're actually doing studies, looking at when are we finding more Nurdles than under certain conditions. So, during rain events, we tend to find more because they're coming off of the land, getting into the waterways, and then getting up on the riverbanks and the beaches and things like that. If you're at a beach and we have a high storm surge, so the water's coming up to the sand dunes, we find more then, and we think it's because all the old ones are being released from the sand that were covered up with sand. They're now being exposed, and new ones are coming in. So I think we can look at it as job security, I guess, unfortunately. But because they're around so long, we've got a long way to go before we start seeing a reduction in plastic pellets. And really, we need to see some policy changes at the state level, at the international level, at the national level and international level. So at all levels, we need to see policy changes before we start seeing a reduction in Nurdles in the environment.
Okay, that leads perfectly to my next question. So as part of that, what can plastic manufacturers do to stop the release of Nurdles? So they are getting out. Is there a way that they can be manufactured so they don't get out?
Yeah, well, yes, there's a couple of things. There's actually a lot of things here. And the petroleum industry, the plastics industry, actually created a program called Operation Clean Sweep back in the early 90s. And in there, they have a lot of good information about how to keep pellets from getting off site. So you don't want if you're a plastics manufacturer or transporter or any of these companies that handle these pellets, you don't want them outside your fence line. So the goal is to keep them on your property. And so there's stormwater retention ponds, there's plastic pellet separators, there's bins. They have vacuums on site that backpack vacuums, ones that you can drive around that look like lawnmowers, truck vacuums for big spills. There are a lot of things that have been developed over the last 30 some odd years to be able to help clean these up and prevent them from getting off site. So yes, it's 100% preventable from these nurdles from getting off site.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So now
Oh,
let's,
and I will say, let me mention one more thing about the Operation Clean Sweep. It's a great program. The problem with the program is that it is a voluntary program. So if industries want to get involved, they can learn a lot. There's a lot of training in there for their employees. That's all great, but there is no, if they don't follow the rules of it, no, they're not getting in trouble or anything. It's basically a sign on. And if they want to learn about it, they can. So really a lot of those things that the Operation Clean Sweep has developed, those should be taken by the state or federal governments and made mandatory in the industrial permits that these industries are getting. So that way everybody's on the same page and nobody's getting a pass. There's accountability for everybody.
for sure, that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk a little bit more about what are the solutions. So one thing that I'm working on is trying to get the Plastic Pellet-Free Waters Act passed. So that is a bill that's in Congress. It's been introduced both in the Senate and in the House, and currently has 8 senators signed on and 61 in the House of Representatives. And it's officially bipartisan, not by a lot, but it is bipartisan. So in this bill, this would prohibit the dumping or spilling of nurdles from facilities or sources that make, use, package, or transport them. So we think this is one step into helping curb our plastic pollution problems. So what other things would you recommend? And then can you also tell us a little bit more about how people can get involved with Nurdle Patrol and how to do a Nurdle hunt?
Oh, yes, perfect. Okay, always. So I think that the policy stuff is so key, because really if the agencies that are going out and the people that are regulating the companies don't have the tools they need, so the policies they need within their programs to be able to say, I see a problem, we know how to fix it, it needs to be done, or there's going to be fines associated with that. So there needs to be strict enforcement once these policies are passed, and there needs to be it needs to be swift. So it can't be something where they're going to get, say, a multi-billion-dollar company that's making trillions of nurdles a year, and they're having continuous spills. It can't be a 3-year-long investigation and then they get fined $50,000, because that doesn't make sense. So really it needs to be swift enforcement. It needs to be changes need to be made on site if there is a company that continually spills that it's known about. So there needs to be continuous inspections to make sure that that's not happening. And then if it does keep happening, there needs to be fines associated with it that match the company that is really going to hit the pocketbook, because that's how we see change.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good way to start, I think. For people that want to get involved in Nurdle Patrol, actually, so let me say this: if people want to do something individually in their own lives, try to reduce the amount of plastic they're using. It's not directly to the nurdles, but it does. I mean, the more that we use plastic, the more that's going to be produced. And so, some of the easy ones are the plastic bag you take to the grocery store. You don't have to use it. You don't have to use a bag at all. If I forget my reusable bag, I just put the stuff in my back seat, wait till I get home, put it in. Most of us are 10 to 15 minutes away from our grocery store anyway. So you don't need a bag. Single-use water bottles. 99.9% of the water is drinkable in the US. Take a reusable water bottle. That's an easy one. I never drink out of plastic water bottles. And it's mostly because of the plastic, but also a health reason. I don't know if you saw this year, there's like 240,000 particles or something crazy like that in one water bottle that you're drinking. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this should be banned with this information, but so that's something else. So look at what you're using at your own home and try to do better. We can always do better. To get involved with Nurdle Patrol, real easy. Go to nurdlepatrol.org and there's a 4-minute video on the homepage that tells you how to do a Nurdle survey, why you're doing the Nurdle survey, what the information is going towards, which is towards changing policy about how these plastic pellets are handled. And then once you do your survey, what do you do with your data? And so it goes through and shows you how to insert your data into the website or the app. There's also a phone app you could download, Nurdle Patrol. So those are kind of the basics of it. And we have now over 10,000 volunteers around the world that have gotten involved in over 30 countries, and over 21,000 surveys have been done. And so, if you are living in an area, you go to the map on nurdlepatrol.org and zoom in. And if nobody has done a survey in your area, that's your call to action, is go out and do a survey, be the first one to put it on the map and see if there's a problem. I mean, if they don't find any, that's data too. We like to see if there's 0 nurdles found, that's a good thing, put that in too.
Perfect. I think if you're also part of a school, you can take part in it too, yeah?
So we have a lot of different programs that we do. So I go out to schools, I meet schools out on the beach, and do Nurdle surveys with them. I go to a bunch of different festivals and stuff like that, community groups. So yeah, schools can get involved if you're with a school, if you're with a homeschool or an ISD, independent school district, you can do it. There are colleges that do it for their class and some of their field work. Girl Scout groups, Boy Scout groups. So really any kind of group at any and all ages can get involved with Nurdle Patrol. And if somebody wants to get involved and they're a part of an official group that has a logo and they're willing to go out once a month and do a survey, they can go to nurdlepatrol.org and sign up for a Nurdle kit. So we will send you a kit that has, you don't need anything to do a Nurdle survey, but we will send you a kit as an incentive to do monthly surveys with a bunch of volunteers. Help your community get involved and make change.
That sounds like great fun. Great fun. Is there anything else you want to say about Nurdles? Anything I didn't ask, but you feel is important to mention?
Well, I always kind of end my presentations when I go out to the community and talk, because really you want to ask the questions like, well, who cares? Why should we care? Well, this has been a problem for decades. And, I have kids. I've got a couple teenagers. We know there's a problem, and we know there's solutions to it. And I'm not going to put this off. And I don't think anybody else wants to put this off to the next generation. So we need to make changes now. And so I tell people you can be part of that, part of making change for that next generation is go out and do a Nurdle survey.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Well, Jace, thank you so very much. I really appreciate your time, and I very much appreciate everything you're doing.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.